Hello and welcome to today's edition of Reel It In. I'm Dan Sapin, psychologist and psychotherapist out of Huntington, New York, and I'm here with my usual buddies.
Martin Hallberg calling in from Stockholm, Sweden.
Joe Messina in Boston.
And we're privileged today to have my dear old friend, Dr. Webb Garrison, joining us, who's going to have a lot of good food for thought and food for the soul today. Webb, why don't you tell us why you're here?
Sure. First of all, I thank you, Dan, Martin, and Joe for having me. I'm thrilled to be here and thrilled to be your guest. I'm looking forward to the discussion that will emerge and kind of constellate as we continue to talk and wade through topics. I am here, well, one, because you asked me to be here, Dan, and one of the reasons that you asked me to be here is that I am a PhD, I'm a psychologist, and I've been practicing for 28 years, but I also have a background in spiritual practice. And throughout my career, I have sought to integrate spiritual awareness, philosophical awareness, and psychological awareness. And this goes back well before I entered the field. So just, quick primer, okay, to give you a little sense of where some of the spirituality and psychology come from. My father was kind of a mystic dude, but he was also kind of schizotypal. So he was a little bit weird and kept to himself and had a lot of strange perceptual types of experiences, including energy types of experiences. His father was a Methodist minister and very philosophical. His favorite conversation in the 1950s was talking with other Southern ministers about the almost certainty that Jesus was of much darker skin than typically portrayed. So that's Webb Garrison Sr. He was kind of a radical in some ways. And the joke about him upon his death was he was probably the only atheist Methodist minister that had been in the ministry for over 30 years. He wrote about 60 books, mostly about obscure things about history or about the nature of language and why we say certain things. So that's a little bit about the spiritual heritage that I come from. I come from the South, and so I had to navigate a lot of the evangelical kind of thought process, a lot of the density that's involved in that. I was raised Methodist, and I didn't even know this until much later. Methodism is actually a form of spirituality or form of Christianity that is intended to create a method for someone kind of channeling Christ consciousness. Okay. Now I had no idea that that's actually where the name Methodism comes from, but that was implicit in my engagement in spirituality from a young age. I never got caught up in the dogmatic teachings of Christianity, but I was very moved by the quality of consciousness that Christ possessed. The kind of open oceanic love, capacity to heal others by by touch on the one hand, but also through love, honestly. As I grew, I pushed against the cage of Christianity a bit more. By 16, I was reading Buddhism. By 17, I started reading Jung, actually. And then up until that point, I had wanted to either be a neurosurgeon or a cardiovascular surgeon. I wanted to cut up the head or the heart. And once I got
destroy it or see what was on the inside.
I guess probably a little bit of both, and really for the purposes of healing, but it's certainly a very Western allopathic approach to healing. Sometimes absolutely necessary, just to be clear. Sometimes surgery is absolutely necessary. But once I started reading Jung and another aspect of my consciousness awakened, I realized that I wouldn't find gratification in medical practice. And I went to college, decided to become a religious studies major. The spring semester of my sophomore year, and I won't get into it. There were a lot of psychodynamic things going on that I won't get into. Parental divorce, yada yada, you know, all of the, I'll just say the shattering of youthful idealism. You know, maybe that's a good way of putting it on lots of different levels.
Heard
So
of it.
so my spring semester of my sophomore year, I decided that I wanted to meditate. Okay, I had already studied Buddhism, but really hadn't, and I'd done meditation a couple of times, but really hadn't done formal meditation. So I was reading a Vedic text, and it kind of like gave a prescription of like, okay, you know, do this much meditation this much a day, and do this practice this much a day, and do this practice this much a day. And within 2 years, you know, you'll kind of go through this process of release and growth. And I was an impetuous 19-year-old who didn't feel that I had 2 years to spare. So I figured just to double it all up and to meditate incessantly, which I did for 3 months. It was about a half-hour formal meditation in the morning, about a half-hour formal meditation in the evening. I made every walk into a walking meditation. I made every meal into an eating meditation. I made every exercise into an exercise meditation, every class into a meditative process. And honestly, at the end of 3 months, my reality system started to collapse. So at that point, I found myself flooded with, and meditation became very, very rich, by the way. Toward the end of that 3 months, I moved into a place in meditation. It's almost hard to describe in language because language is a completely different system of representation. But it was like I penetrated through a thought wall, and I felt that I was at the top of a funnel, and I felt that my consciousness was slowly circulating and moving down this funnel. Okay. Now, mind you, I was 19. I didn't know anything about chakras. I didn't know anything about Kundalini. I was not well versed. I didn't know anything about the stuff that I now know. But I can now recognize some of what was happening at that point. So that culminated in me being overwhelmed with sensations of energy, feeling energy constricted around my head, feeling my head expanded and exploded. I also experienced a lot more synchronicities during that period of time, thinking of someone and then literally seeing them, you know, come out from behind a building, walk toward me. You know, this was happening over, you know, like a lot. And so it was too much. And I decided to take a break from school. That actually got me onto the analytic couch 4 days a week. So at 19, I started psychoanalysis with someone 4 days a week on the couch. Actually, the first 2-3 sessions, I resisted the couch. And then I felt that this guy was just looking into the depths of my soul. Like, you know, his energy was very deep, and he was just, you know, and I just had one of those moments. Maybe it was more than 2 or 3 sessions, but I had one of those moments where I was like, I just can't do this. And he said, why don't you try the couch? So I got on the couch and I just relaxed and kind of gave myself to this process. And you know, so I was in analysis 4 days a week for maybe 3 months, then cut down to 3 days a week, and did that for about 1.5 years. And that entire period of time, I was kind of very open and receptive, and I used my analysis as an anchor to the world. So that period of time was very rich in terms of different awarenesses that I was developing, both intellectually, philosophically, and experientially. And that actually is what brought me into the field of psychology. I felt that you know, I was interested in understanding what I experienced. I'm still interested in, you know, who the dude behind the curtain is. You know, we can only get glimpses of this mysterium tremendum, this huge mystery. You know, and sometimes the glimpses that we get are actually staring into the jaws of an abyss that we can never understand, and it's not always so rosy and dozy as some might suggest in different spiritual circles. So I had the experience of my analyst being very open and receptive, and it was a fascinating experience. I felt that when I went into analysis, I felt that I was being held within his consciousness. I don't know how else to put it, but it felt like he was able to expand his consciousness to the point that I was able to kind of reside in it and come to greater awarenesses within it, almost like our consciousnesses somehow were coalescing in a way that was not able to be verbalized. And that is what I brought to my own psychotherapeutic process when I started seeing patients at the age of 22. I tried to make each session into a meditative process in which I was able to open my channels, let's say, and get my own thought out of the way so that I could feel the person on the other side of it. And over the years, a lot of different awarenesses have developed, and a lot of different experiences have also happened. So that's a little bit of a little introduction about kind of what I experienced, kind of on the front end of this energy awareness stuff, throughout my career. Just to, I guess, to supplement that, I've continued to be very interested in allopathic medicine. I'm also interested in alternative medicine. I'm very interested in plant medicine. I play with essential oils and make my own deodorant and skin creams and all those kinds of fun things. And I've also studied various forms of indigenous spiritual practices. And I was in Santa Fe for about 5 years. During that period of time, I worked at a college for 4 years. I taught there 1 year and then was hired as dean. And I worked there for 4 years as dean and also taught. And that college is a college that was born out of, it offers it's called Southwestern College in Santa Fe. It offers a master's in counseling and a master's in art therapy. It was actually born out of an aura balancing tradition. So it was founded, the lineage of that school was based on energy medicine. And the way that education was done there was unlike anything that you will find in most places, and definitely on the East Coast. Arguably, it's a one of a kind kind of place. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. Right now, I teach undergraduate. I have a practice. I've worked incessantly throughout my career. So all of these awarenesses have developed, while raising a family, while having a very earthly, a very earthly life with a lot of concrete, real demands. So
Yeah. Well, one of the things I remember, and for our millions of viewers and listeners, hi, how are you? One of the things I recall about you, Webb, from the days we met at the Derner Institute, was that you were always working, that you needed to work, and at the same time, this spiritual bent, which was very powerful. I mean, it was one of the reasons you and I seemed to get along in the old days, that we immediately had some points of contact, was that you had this balance of pragmatism. Oh, you needed to survive is the feeling I had. That's what I remember after 30 years. And at the same time, it seemed to be this hunger for knowing, well, as you said, the man behind the curtain and what he represents. And as you described that funnel, I couldn't help but, well, a couple of questions and thoughts popped into mind. One was superficially anyway, the similarity between your life and Carl Jung's. The son of, in some respects schizotypal, in that Jung had lots of visions and perceptual experiences and very fluid boundaries between his unconscious mystical processes and that formidable mind. But he was the son of a very philosophically oriented Lutheran minister who in his case had kind of lost his faith, as opposed to simply, as you said, becoming an atheist Methodist. That tradition, that parallel fascinates me. But in talking about that funnel and the energy, question came to mind. If you recall, where did the funnel seem to spiral down into? Did you have a sense of that?
I did not know. Okay. And actually at the time, I had a fantasy that if I ever had that experience again, I would want to be hooked up to all kinds of different monitoring equipment to see what's happening physiologically as this is happening with my consciousness. And I've not been in that kind of controlled condition, to be honest. I did not know what was at the bottom of the funnel, but every time I meditated, I found myself moving deeper into it. And I felt that at the base of the funnel was something very profound, that would provide me with some kind of answer, let's say. Now, later in life, I did have an experience in which I breathed to the point, and this was very similar to that. I breathed to the point that that I lost awareness of everything but breath, and I could feel energy coming out of me, and then at a certain point I collapsed, and there was a huge explosion of light. Now, whether that was the bottom of the funnel, I don't know, but that happened right before I found this staff, this second experience that I'm talking about. So I can't, I don't know. Yeah, look, this is the bottom line, and this is what I tell people. I'm not a great disciple because I have authority issues, okay? So I'm not great at being a disciple of anyone. I like to discover things on my own. And I'm also not a good guru because I reject the whole idea of guruism pretty much. So, so that's why a lot of this stuff, I simply don't know what it is. How do we represent this in language? How much of this is just my, idiosyncratic experience, and how much of this is actually a form of experiences that others can tap, hopefully much more gently than I have, and use in daily life in some kind of way, as a way of being more connected to themselves, to their loved ones, to the earth, to the greater society.
The purpose of healing and therapy, in the broadest sense, however we approach it, one version of which was Freud's freedom to love and work. But with or without Freud, the bottom line is the bottom line. How do you live more fully, connect more meaningfully? But I don't want to be too much of a conductor here, but Joe, the question you raised, the topic you raised a little while ago, as we were preparing, I think dovetails nicely with this, the idea of the individual getting lost in this world of generalities and data. And that to me was such a great jumping off point, because for me, Webb, one of the fascinations here is how you've lived in both worlds, so to speak, the mystical, the healing, the ineffable stuff. And you're a guy who works and has a family and plays and you don't live in some rarefied spiritual world. So the middle way, so to speak. But let me turn it over to you fellas. What do you want to say?
Yeah, I brought up the Carl Jung's undiscovered self, the idea that the individual gets lost in statistical analysis, and as much as I think that we live in a hyper individualistic society, I think that and I think there's an element to this in the Jung piece, that without the fully realized individual, you lose the power of the collective as well, and that goes right into all the Marxism and all the stuff I like. But yeah, I'm glad you drew that that dichotomy of the like living a kind of regular life in in the real world. Because yeah, I didn't even realize that it would fit in that well.
Yeah, I like that, Joe. It's a good entry point into like current affairs or whatever. I think it's quite interesting what this whole data monitoring of people, how it kind of pushes out the individuality or the subjectivity of people's agency. So we become quite lazy. Like everything from what direction to drive on Google to order your Fedora or Uber food home. It's like the judgment of the individual gets more and more not needed, one could say. We don't need individual judgment. We just need to order what's been proposed on our phone when we step into our home at night after working or whatever. So in that context, I think it's very kind of salient, this idea of the individuated self being able to be in touch with both kind of group phenomena and, let's say, the kind of more oceanic, wide consciousness, and on the other hand, the more concrete world out there, where language and politics and material issues such as money and time and, you know, those kind of two dimensions. So in that aspect, I think that maybe archetype or that individual, you know, that can access that funnel, maybe that the Webb have been talking about. If that's the funnel, I don't know, but kind of somehow hover between those polarities. And I guess that's what happens in psychoanalysis too, right? Like there are regressive, one uses that word, moments like down to something, and then there are movements up towards a more, let's say, concrete and well-defined space. So I think that's a very good, that's a very good place to talk a little bit about, I think, because it's very important, not the least in terms of this kind of dataizing, how do you say, dataizing of our society.
Datafication. Well, one thing that I just want to point out is that what we're talking about is this is an archetypal struggle, actually. The struggle between collectivism and individuality is an archetypal struggle, and you can see that manifest. I mean, you know, like even in like Star Wars, you can see it manifest everywhere. Okay, but Martin, as you were talking, what came to my mind was the fact that this exactly is the tension that exists between religion and spirituality. Okay, that if you take a conventionally religious approach, it was the authority of the church that told people how to live and what they were supposed to do. Now it's the authority of who likes you, what's liked, you know, how we're connected in this kind of way. This is now the new church. Okay, the Gnostic approach, okay, or a way of engaging mystically, you know, or we can call it a Gnostic or a mystical approach to religion or spirituality, means that you become a channel for the spiritual energies that you're trying to contact. Not that you just worship them outside of yourself, okay, but that you actually become a conduit for those kinds of energies, and that you develop these relationships on or you develop this awareness in terms of direct experience, as opposed to on the authority of the external. So I just wanted to point that out, that this is, you know, this we can now, you know, kind of see, you know, we can see this archetypal struggle between the authority of the individual and the authority of the collective, even within, you know, the tracing religious and spiritual traditions. We can see it in terms of economic tradition. I mean, you know, this is a pattern. You know, one of the things that I'm interested in is sacred geometry, and with sacred geometry, what you know is that there are these patterns that underlie various phenomena. So, for example, this, you know, this ammonite. Whoa! Yes. Nothing like a little chaos.
It escaped.
Nothing like a little chaos. All right. So this ammonite, this piece of ammonite, okay, is that's a golden spiral.
Golden ratio.
This is a golden spiral, and so this is the same spiral that we would see, you know, as the shape of the Milky Way. It's the same spiral that we see when we watch water go down the drain. Okay, so you know, so that's one of the things that I'm very interested in. Actually, is like, where do we see these patterns in various iterations, various incarnations, various constellations? You know,
isn't that fractality? Speaking of Santa Fe, isn't there a university down there, like the Complexity University or something, Santa Fe Institute for like complexity studies and things like that?
I don't know. That's a good question. I know that there's, you know, they definitely have. I mean, there's Santa Fe College, but I don't think that's more of an art school, if I recall. Okay. You know, that's what I recall.
I think there is a program down there. I think Michael Conforte, the Jungian who works on complexity theory.
The Creativity and Madness, that one? or no?
He does that. He's also written Freedom, Form, and Fate, which was very much about the archetypal patterns and how they repeat. I just want to point something out, which I think will
Called Santa
be.
Fe Institute.
You got
Okay.
it?
Yeah, Santa Fe Institute it's called.
Cool.
Very cool.
See, I immediately, as you were talking about the repeating pattern throughout nature, the one favorite example of which is the nautilus or the ammonite, and how that not just the fact that it's a spiral, but the actual proportions, the ratio, which had been, I forget, was it Pythagoras or was it the ancient Greeks knew the significance of this ratio.
The Egyptians knew. I mean, before the Greeks,
Yeah.
you know, it's phi. Yeah.
Hence, it's archetypal.
Yeah, oh yeah.
It is archetypal, meaning it is, people mistake often Jung's notion of the archetype as being just like Kant's forms, namely these cosmological or ontological patterns. The idea that there is a pure universe of which we are a degraded example, or rather, even the real world. You know, the parable of Plato's cave, where one person points out to the rest that they are just like people sitting in a cave watching the shadows of a light behind them flickering on the cave wall, mistaking the shadows for the real world. But the real world is behind, around, we're enveloped in it. But I could imagine the scientific, positivistic person saying, yeah, that's just physics, you know, so Milky Way patterns, it's all math. And I just want to say one of the useful areas of Jung, only because he was one of many to channel this idea, but he concretized it for the Western mind reasonably well, was precisely what he means by the archetype, which is not that it is kind of the way humans perceive the constants of nature. Jung's fundamental assumption was that psyche is a dimension of nature. We do not live in a meaningless material universe. We are the self-awareness of the universe. We are the universe waking up and watching itself. And that, in a way, the fact that these patterns repeat and that they are meaningful to us, and that these fractal repetitions on every scale of nature are things that we not only perceive but utilize and make part of human life, and then allow us to look deeper into the universe of which we are the consciousness. It allows us to see that the archetype is the eternal pattern as it is reflected in the mind and body of the human being, who happens to be at a sort of a central subjective point in nature. So the idea that the spirals mean something, it's not just that we like pretty spiral things and we love, this notion of apophenia, that we see patterns in just physical mathematical stuff. That doesn't capture it. We make it meaningful. And the fact that this pertains to our psychical life, our spiritual life, the fact that we can find something beautiful and divine in what a mathematician might say is merely a process, merely a proportion, is what makes psychology so much fun. And spirituality, this lens into everything. And how this plays too, I think, Joe, into the Marxist problem, the whole notion of religion as the opiate of the masses. And Webb, you pointed out that this is a similar tension between religion and spirituality. We have to draw a distinction too between religion and spirituality, that religion as fed to the masses through the authority structure is like OxyContin being just dumped from a helicopter into the Appalachians, pretty much, so that everybody can get on board. Whereas spirituality is nothing more or less than the individual waking up to his place in a bigger world he can't fit into language or the linguistic mind. So Marx, being a guy who liked the idea of the collective and what it can accomplish, well, here we are. talking about the collective realm.
Do I complicate things too much if we throw in planet Earth and climate change into this whole discussion?
And also,
I hope so.
And also the frequency of the Earth. If I could throw, since you brought up Earth, I think mentioning the frequency of the Earth, which is 7.8 hertz, is also important and can maybe be woven into this discussion as well. So
what about that, or what were you thinking about that? Like, tell me more. I've never heard about this. Yeah.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, Webb, resonance, sound, frequency. We can go places with this.
Let's go places then. Okay. So this is kind of fascinating stuff. And then, whatever. I guess I'm aptly named because Webb means weaver. And one thing that I do is that I tend to weave things together. There are different times in my life that I feel like my task is just to integrate as much different stuff together as I possibly, as I possibly can. So one of the things that, and because I experience energy, and at some point I'd like to return to some of my experience of energy because I think that it could just be instructive, but we'll put that to the side. One of the things that, as I experience energy, I experience it as frequency. I experience high pitches, low pitches, these kinds of things. It's hard to describe. But as I've done more study, and particularly as I returned to the piano and started composing music in my 40s, I became kind of fascinated by resonance and sound, and I was just like poking around, and I found that the Earth has a resonance, and the Earth produces a frequency of 7.82 hertz. Okay, now it's not always 7.82. It's not a constant. Actually, a couple of years ago, it shot up to like 42 hertz for some reason. Now, this is kind of fascinating. This is where it gets
help.
Exactly. This is where it gets fascinating. Okay, if you look at brainwave patterns, delta waves, 0 to 4 hertz, theta waves, 4 to about 7.82. Alpha waves start right about there. Okay, alpha and theta, this is right at where we fall asleep. When we go into a meditative place, the 7.82 is an ideal frequency for us to produce. Okay, so when we go into nature and we allow ourselves to be bathed in this frequency, away from all of this shit that has a much higher frequency. This is all high frequency stuff. Okay, so and then above alpha goes up to about 12. It's 8-ish to 12-ish. Okay, then we have beta from 12-ish to 35-ish, 38-ish, and then gamma, which is about 38-ish to about 42-ish or 43. Gamma is not well understood. Gamma waves that we produce, they still don't understand the highest frequency waves that we produce. So in terms of awareness of the Earth and how this connects back into indigenous practice and climate change and the fact that we are all part of one organism, it is hard for me to imagine that it is a coincidence that the Earth produces the frequency that is perfectly soothing to our consciousness. We evolved here, So now, we develop this technological idea of ownership of the Earth, whatever that is. I can like carve off a piece of land and say, oh yeah, I own this.
It's mine to break, slice up, and
it's like Daffy Duck. It's mine. It's mine. It's all mine. Back in the day. So the reality is that even the idea of ownership of the Earth is a fundamental idea that skews the reality of what we are as creatures. That the Earth owns us.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a little bit of what I have to say about kind of frequency and resonance and just some of our natural relationship. The other thing is this, sympathetically, when we're exposed to different patterns, different brainwave patterns, we start producing them. Okay, so we sympathetically start producing brainwaves when we're exposed to certain frequencies, and so anyway,
well, I thought when you were naming those frequencies, I thought of Star Trek, and those are actually the names of the quadrants of the galaxy in Star Trek.
That's funny.
Alpha, beta, gamma, and I think delta.
That's really funny.
So yeah,
So which one is the best place to live in? Which one is the like ideal galaxy, or are they all?
The one Earth is in is Alpha.
Okay.
So yeah, and that knowing Star Trek and the kind of like science consultants they would have on the show and stuff, that's probably not an accident.
When we get to M87, we find that's where you go to party. But it's hard to get there, and the bouncers are awful. But
another kind of dichotomy or one of those tensions, like we spoke about the individual versus kind of a collective strain. Another one is the kind of, and I guess Webb, you would have a lot of experience from the meditation, maybe like on the one hand, the desire to know, to clinch, to grasp, I guess is maybe a Buddhist term, I'm not sure. But on the other hand, to let go, to surrender, to fold, whatever is the best words here. So that's another kind of tension couple in a way that is also quite salient in this discussion, because this, like we talk about physics, we talk about fractals, like there's also a kind of desire to know. One could use that as a kind of descriptive metaphor for some of the, the people, the institutions, the scientists, the researchers, that they want to clinch deeper and deeper and deeper into this. They need to know something. And the other picture would then be the opposite, to release, to float, to this would be, I guess, the negative capability that we spoke about in previous episodes of the Keatsian concept of not grasping after, what is it he says, irritable facts and reason.
The irritable grasping after fact and reason.
Yeah.
That I refer to that as apprehension, not comprehension, but apprehension. I forget who else refers to that, but
apprehension of beauty is a term by Meltzer, actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's just kind of being receptive, So yeah, it's another polarity of are we going to impose or are we going to be receptive? Are we it's very, all of this is very, very rich. Yeah.
And even like dissecting bodies or brains, or like you said, Dan, you buy a piece of land to start destroying it, or whatever you joked just previously here. That's also a kind of image of that, of dissecting, wanting to know. So I think that's a very important kind of element of, not the only one, but one way to look at science, the kind of positivistic paradigm of, the past 100 years or so, of like setting up a way of living that is almost divorced from the kind of natural conditions from where it emerged in the beginning.
Right, and if you think about William James's work, a variety of religious experiences, that was written actually about 100 years ago. He talks about the reality of the unseen like it's just a normal thing. He talks about these other phenomena that now, like you said, with the positivistic or focus on behavioral stuff, that really kind of got cranking in the 40s and 50s, and I guess a little before that with frontal lobotomies in 1935 and stuff like that, but it was not that long ago that there was a greater acceptance or receptivity to the fact that we don't know much, okay, on a physical level, just as an illustration of how little we know, okay, or how little we can even perceive. All right, we, in our eyes, we have we have 3 cones, right? Dogs and cats have 2 cones. They can't see as much color as we can. We have 3 cones. Some extraordinary people have 4 cones. Almost, I think all that have been detected are women. Okay.
My wife is one of those. She can pick colors and remember them that I can't see the difference. She remembers the differences over the course of decades and doesn't understand why other people don't see them.
That's fascinating. Now, the mantis prawn has 13 cones in its eye. What the hell does it see? Right?
Have you ever thought of the
light spectra? We can only see 5% of the light spectra. What are we not seeing? How much of the audio spectra can we not see? Here, what's there that we don't know?
Yeah. This reminds me of a point you made, Joe, in an episode way back. Do you remember that? You took that example of like a straw being dent, like, the straw that comes under the surface. Like certain animals can detect the difference of how it looks a lot better than like you made an example of birds that are fishing, for example.
Yeah,
I remember you saying like, yeah,
birds like don't see the distortion, but we do for whatever reason.
yeah.
And it's like, yeah, you hear something like that alone, and it's just like, well, that's weird. Like, what?
Excuse
How
me.
much of like what I believe is just because these are the eyes that evolved, you know? Like,
Yeah.
Right. And for me, one of the things that has been important is to try to push beyond my various sensory systems, if that makes sense, you know, because I know that there's more there, that we usually are taught to ignore, to be totally honest. And
What is
growing up, yeah.
Do you have a take on this? Now I'm, this is not like, I don't know the whole ins and out, but the kind of Bayesian brain and the predictive brain, the idea of the brain as a hypothetical generating machine that is always wrong. So in a way, there is always a kind of constant controlled hallucinations. There are some philosophers that use that term. They basically say that what we constantly do, all our waking time is project very good, but always off kind of hallucinatory predictions, and then we gather the feedback through our sensory system. How much dissonance is caused here, and in the best cases, we're mature and aware enough to update our predictions, even though that's hard work. But that's a kind of view of the brain as being one of those kind of predictive coding machines, essentially.
Yes. Yes. Well, and I think that something like beginner's mind in Zen, okay, is all about allowing yourself to relax out of those predictions, if that makes sense. Beginner's mind in Zen means that we experience something, even if we've experienced it 1,000 times before, we experience it as though it is the first time we have experienced it.
Naivete as a virtue.
Exactly. Grounded naivete, individuated naivete, which is different, going back to this idea of being, kind of an undeveloped self being sucked into an undeveloped horde. An individuated naivete is a naivete that is able to have authority about what it is experiencing. Okay, so if you look at the tradition of Zen archery, which my first analyst turned me on to this. He actually
Eugen Herrigel.
The art of, what is it? Zen and the Art of Archery. Yeah. He had me read that within the first week or two of doing analysis, and he said, "Well, this is pretty much what we're going to do." If it's a great read, it's a short read, but it's absolutely astounding. It has to do with developing alternative senses through slow repetition. That a Zen archer, when a Zen archer becomes a master, a Zen archer can hit a bullseye blindfolded at 100 yards. Because the Zen archer feels the target inside of themselves. Now, the process of becoming a Zen archer is, first you go out and you have a longbow and you pull the string. You can't touch the arrow at first. You just pull the string and you don't even let it go. You just pull it, you just pull it, you just pull it, and the master watches you. And when the master senses, okay, you're ready to move along, then you're able to pull and release, and you do this for weeks or months until the master says, okay, you're ready to go on to the next step. And so it's this process by which a person gradually attunes themselves to subtler energies and subtler awarenesses that exist within the self that connect tangibly to the outside world.
You have
I love
a concrete
grounded naivete. Sorry, no, I've never heard that term. I love it. Grounded naivete. It's also
it's a new one.
It's a paradoxical phrase in a way, but it's beautiful. Like it's a state worth searching for or working for, I think.
Oh my goodness, yes. I think there's a potential dovetail here, and that what I hear you describing, Webb, is a certain approach to the collapsing of dichotomies. That is not a matter of everything becoming the sort of primordial soup that consciousness sort of loses itself in, but it becomes a way of greatly expanding the envelope of our awareness. And by the envelope, using sort of a quasi-musical idea, the notion that time and our relationship to the present, we both become more grounded in the present, but our consciousness and our agency and subjectivity expand so that the moment, the psychic time, becomes much broader. so that what we consider to be the present is a much greater scope, which allows both for what you would call insight, enlightenment. It allows for such apocryphal and yet true notions as the blindfolded archer hitting the bullseye at 100 yards. It also, for me, and Joe, if you want to grab a hold of any of this, links to, this is going to be a bit of a stretch. I'll see if I can pull it off. One problematic distinction between the capitalist and socialist mindsets, leading us back to our relation to the environment, to the planet as well, in the sense that I was just taking notes before trying to sketch out an idea that at the psychological heart of capitalism, you have that Randian libertarian idea of the self-reliant, independent self, which sort of, yeah, the severing of the connection between people, the willful and self-satisfied severing of that oneness that all the other traditions have eventually tried to get to, and that one of the consequences of this, talking about the slicing up of the land, I've always been fascinated with the potential reasons why it is primarily the right-wing, conservative, capitalist side of things that comprises the climate change deniers. And I thought of one element of that, of course, being that people don't like to feel guilty or ashamed. And the idea that somehow it requires treating the earth as an object and thereby destroying it in order to really fulfill the capitalist notion of finding and selling and buying resources, and that this is somehow the natural order of things. The natural order of things is for us to shit where we eat and then sell the parts. But there was also the dovetail of the capitalist mindset, climate denying, and fundamentalist religion. And one of the precepts of fundamentalist Christianity, anyway, or Christianity itself, is that we are the stewards over the planet and its beings other than the human. And so I couldn't help but see, whether it's accidental, meaningless, or somehow useful, that one reason for a capitalist Christian to deny climate change is that there is a fundamental guilt and fear in the notion that we have, like Moses striking the rock in order to demand that water pour forth and thereby being denied access into the promised land. That capitalist is afraid that he was given the job to watch over the planet, and instead he broke it up and sold pieces of it and is therefore in trouble. And so if the climate of the earth is falling apart, you've been a very bad boy.
Yeah, and one of the things that, not to be overly simplistic, but there is a fair proportion of the evangelical community that are also, deny climate change, and fall within the more conservative political continuum. A recent study about cognitive process indicated that those who were raised in strictly evangelical homes tend to struggle with certain forms of cognitive deficits later in life, because they are taught at a young age to accept on the basis of faith and belief and not to question. And so it disarms a person's critical thinking capacities. Now, obviously, that's a generalization. I'm not saying that everyone raised in an evangelical household struggles with this, just to qualify that. But as a general trend, it's fascinating that at a young age, we can be taught a mindset that essentially paralyzes our capacity to think analytically and really to individuate as we get older. to actually reach our own conclusions, to develop our own authority instead of a form of authoritarianism that we have modeled. Living within your own authority is very different from channeling negative animus that you are either possessed by as an archetype or you have modeled or some combination thereof. So anyway, those are my thoughts.
Good ones. Joe, I saw you nodding at a certain point. I don't mean nodding off, I mean nodding knowingly.
Maybe now, Dan, maybe now we can edit this out because I've written in the chat, I need to go and piss. So
that's kind of a radical idea.
Yeah, so we can edit this out. It was a good break anyway, and we'll give it back to Joe. Yeah,
I'll pause us.
Yeah.
So, Joe, you have thoughts about the socialist capitalist angle here?
Yeah. So I think that that is a really good point because the one of those big differences between the two is that capitalism relies on the never-ending acquisition and consumption of resources, because in order to have a stable economy or whatever it is, you just have to keep it going, keep growing the pile. And that is one of the advantages of socialism, is that it doesn't need that. I think so that is a huge important difference. I think that socialism is not necessarily like the perfect way to like end overconsumption. I think that there's a lot of good that could be done by like distributing resources more fairly and like giving more people land ownership and access to resources and all of that. But that doesn't mean that we won't still be overusing our plot of land and resources. And that's why it's like it should be a continuous process to like keep improving upon how we do it. Okay. So what was I saying? It should be this continuous process of improving upon how we handle all of that, the way we use resources and how we renew them and all of that.
Well, and I think that goes even beyond the whole capitalist socialist model. I mean, that goes to the fundamental nature of economy. If we had a resource-based economy in which there were an obligation to replenish the earth, if that was actually a part of the economy,
right? Okay,
yeah. That if you take, you have to give. That, I mean, and they've played with this with like carbon credits and like that kind of stuff, but it's lame. It's really, really lame. Right. But if there were actually a basic philosophy that if we take, we have to give back. If that were somehow economized, okay, and became an inherent part of the economy, then honestly, that could be compatible with a capitalistic or a socialistic or a social, a democratic socialistic, perspective. But the focus on rampant consumptionism, is one of the things that's killing us,
right?
Individually and as a species.
I mean, I think there's a lot to be said. I talk about Star Trek all the time, and I think that in some ways you could call their society socialist. In a lot of ways, it's sort of maybe even a little beyond that distinction, because it is more of what you're talking about, and it's like they're beyond the overuse problem, and a big thing too is that the earth is united, right? So there's no like real country borders, and I think that's a big part of it as well. And that that's sort of like a third like pillar to bring into it is that like yeah, well, a big part of the problem is that the US has what it has, and then like we see something in Venezuela and we're like, well, it'd be nice if we had that. And, and then it's like, well, yeah, but if we didn't see Venezuela as so different from us, then we wouldn't need to just go and like grab it from there to use over here. It would be like, well, okay, we're all part of the same thing here, so how do we do this? And yeah, I think there's also some good examples in Native American tribes. I think it's the Navajo and the Iroquois had like certain elements that you could definitely compare to socialism or communism, but like you said, it also had this like element of rebuilding or replenishing or not using up whatever you're using, and yeah, whatever economic system you end up with, if you are not doing that, then you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Can I jump in there? I don't know if this is right, but I think there's still a little bit of a sound noise, by the way.
Yeah, when we started talking again, I think when Joe was talking, I don't even if your mic was like picking up your breath, but it was.
Now it's gone. Now it's gone. Did you do something, Joe, with your settings or something?
No.
It's weird.
Yeah.
In your Zoom audio, can you do you have it set for auto noise reduction or auto audio optimization?
Yeah, I think I have auto background noise, and yeah.
Is it fatal or can we live with it?
It's the energies from Webb that are coming into our.
Yeah, that's it.
It sounded to me like there was maybe out your window, Dan. Is there like a lot of car passing or?
I have a neighbor who is blowing his leaves, but I've closed my window and that's the most I can do. However, when you're talking now, the sound comes as part of the envelope of your speech.
Interesting.
So, yeah, it sounds like almost breath in a way, but can we live with it? Because I don't know how much tinkering we can do.
Maybe we can filter
Turn
it
down
when
my gain. Is that changing anything? Because the gain will just pick up like any little sound. All right. Is it like a buzz almost? I think I might have heard it there.
It's like buzz combined with air flow.
Yeah. Wow. Let's see. How many things?
You got a great flow of ideas here. I don't want to interrupt it too much, but I don't want it to be annoying to listen.
So, well, there are ways like, just normalizing the audio. But yeah.
All right. So can I continue with my hypothesis here, or idea, or maybe a sense is a better word. Like, it feels to me that what you were talking about there, Joe, with replenishing, giving back as a part of a kind of structural system of some sort, it feels to me that we're kind of closing in on a little bit of what could be a way to bring together what we've been talking about. Like you said, Dan, about the kind of reconciling of paradoxes. I think that to and fro that I infer from Joe's comment about replenishing from where you take, it is a very useful image, whether we talk like Winnicottian terms of playing, or we talk about music, listening to a tune, playing the next tune, responding upon another person's speech, you respond back. There is that kind of weaving in terms of Webb's story about his name, of synthesizing. So I guess in that image, maybe we are kind of closing in on some core concept or fractal pattern or something that has to do with the symbolizing function and integrating opposites, and like you said, putting pieces into that kind of individuated, mature self. So I guess if this sounds like a good idea to you, maybe that's a way into to you, Webb, if you have like experienced to whatever it is I'm trying to talk about here, if you have kind of, you know, energetical experiences of that, or kind of, you know, own experiences that relate to that from your kind of spiritual perspective.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and I would say that I have I guess mundane experiences, and I have more sacred or altered experiences. So I'll start with the mundane. I hate leaf blowers. Dan, you mentioned a leaf blower before. I can't stand them. I think that
They're
they
constant here.
are awful. And if we think about, if you just think about the nature of foliage, okay, and what happens in a natural environment, the foliage falls from the trees, it decomposes, and it creates soil. It nutrifies the earth. That's what it does. We can do this too. All we have to do is mow over our leaves, break them down into little parts, and let them decompose into the earth. Okay.
And it's not
But
pretty.
no, it's not pretty. Of course not. And so as I was taking a walk around the block earlier, it was a lovely walk in every way, except that I passed two leaf blowers, and I was thinking, you know, I was aware, you know, obviously that we were going to be talking today, and I was thinking, okay, so there's noise pollution, right? Just on a concrete level, you know, there's noise pollution from these leaf blowers. But then think about it. Noise is just vibration. So what's the energetic pollution underneath the noise? That's stuff we don't even perceive. That's stuff we don't even measure. How far do those ripples, if every action is like throwing you know, a stone into a pond, what invisible ripples of these kinds of things are, you know, are having effects that we would not even know about? Okay, so that's just a very kind of everyday example, you know, kind of a, let's say, a point of philosophical reflection for something that is simply a nuisance as far as I'm concerned. Now, in terms of other experiences that I've had a lot of, you know, as I mentioned before, I've kind of gone through this process of at different, and it's really happened kind of almost at distinct parts of my life, kind of the development of different energy awarenesses. This happens at distinct points. So around the same time that I had that experience of collapse and finding the staff, right before that, it's hard to describe this. I was finding my energy boundaries becoming very permeable. Okay, I had a different sense of who I was. I had a displaced sense of self. And I was, this was while I was on internship. I was on internship at a psychiatric hospital. It's not a great idea to do energy work in a psychiatric hospital. I recognize that one of the things that happened to me is that I was carrying too much psychotic energy with me. But I was also tutoring for Princeton Review at the time, and you know, I was being flooded with all these different kind of energy experiences. You know, sensing evil at the psychiatric hospital, like a palpable sense of evil. You know, a palpable, like you know, like these kinds of things. But I was having both positive and negative experiences at this point, and I was tutoring someone. And I felt very open and very permeable. I was tutoring someone from the SAT, and then all of a sudden, I had this experience. I have a term for this now. I'll tell you what the term is in a second. But I started feeling a headache, but it was a very strange headache. I usually don't get headaches. It was a headache unlike I'd ever had before. It was a headache that felt like it was outside of my body and it was moving. Okay, and I was like, "What is that?" Okay, and I tracked this sensation. And then all of a sudden, the door opened, and the student's mother came in crying from the garage. You know, so somehow, you know, my consciousness was receptive enough to perceive an energy that was being transmitted beyond the scope of my normal senses, let's say. Okay, now that, you know, so that's one example. That was like an example, you know, in my mid-20s. You know, and just to speak to this on a concrete level also, all right, if you think about EEGs, very few people actually think about EEGs in this way. EEGs take readings of our brain waves, but it does it from outside of our skull. Okay, so that implies that the energy from our mundane brain waves penetrate beyond the boundary of our skull. They go at least to our scalp, okay? And my experience actually of what the self is energetically is that it's probably more like a Tesla coil or a Van de Graaff generator in some ways. That we have an energetic core that takes on a torus shape. Just for those of you who, you guys may all know what a torus is, but some of the audience members may not.
It's a donut.
It's basically a donut. It's like the magnetosphere of the Earth, right? And so it circulates positive and negative, kind of energy. There's a positive pole, a negative pole, and it kind of moves back and forth within this pattern. My experience is that each of us is a torus of sorts, and that we have these tendrils that kind of extend from us. And when we connect with other people, it's like our tendrils kind of connect and we move in. So that was one of my early experiences. Now, as I developed more, like I said, I've had so many experiences, and some of them they would fall under parapsychological. I don't consider myself psychic, just to be clear, but weird shit happens when you're really receptive and you're hanging out with people all day long as a therapist. So there was one time I was talking with a patient, and I knew he was into music, and in my head I heard Primus. I just heard Primus. I'm like, what's your favorite band? He's like, Primus. Okay. And within this all happened like within the same week or two. Okay, what I'm about to describe. So I go through these phases where there's greater permeability and awareness, and then it kind of closes up again. I've gained more control maybe over the years. I'll describe that a little more. Around the same period of time, I was teaching someone meditation. When I teach someone meditation, I can feel how deeply they go into meditation. So if I'm teaching a class of meditation, I can close my eyes and I can feel which of the students are still in their head, which of the students have dropped into their bodies. I can feel areas of higher frequency and lower frequency. Okay. So I was teaching this woman meditation. She'd been in a car accident, and I was teaching her some relaxation therapy, as they say, or they said. Now it's more mindfulness. This was before the mindfulness movement. This was back in 2006, maybe. And as I was teaching, as I was talking through this meditation with her, I started seeing three-dimensional, like holographic butterflies. Okay. And then I saw a holographic hand with a hammer kind of go down like in this, almost like a strobe-like kind of way. Very strange. I'll describe a little perceptual stuff that I go through as well, because that'll give context. So after the meditation, now, okay, just to be clear, this is how spirituality and psychology don't always go together. Okay. What I'm telling you right now, this is a cautionary tale as well. So after the meditation was done, I told her what I saw. I told her, I saw butterflies around you, and I saw this thing with a hammer. And she's like, oh, I have a butterfly. There are butterflies all over my kitchen. My grandmother, I think of her as a butterfly, and so the house is decorated with butterflies. And she was like, I don't know about the hand and the hammer. And then she was like, oh, you know what? When I was a child, I had a recurring nightmare that my father was chasing me and my brother through the house with a hammer, kind of like The Shining, And of course, for my ego, it was like, how fucking cool is this? This is just cool, right? She never came back. So how therapeutic is it? Like this has been a part of the tension that I have navigated through as a psychologist who sometimes gets glimpses of the intuitive. Now, in terms of the perceptual, let me talk a little bit about that. When I'm living my daily life, I'm not in the energy zone. Okay, it's there have been periods of my life, like when I was 19, that I spent 3 months intensively in the energy zone, and it shattered my reality paradigm. It's dangerous to be in that space too long. It's dangerous to be in that space around certain types of people. because it can be fragmenting. That's that's my experience. So, but what has developed for me at this point, and this developed most clearly when I was the dean of the college and teaching at that college in Santa Fe that I mentioned, Southwestern. And again, it was developing before that, but then I wasn't doing therapy. Like during that 5 years, I wasn't doing therapy. So it was easier actually to work with students and develop this awareness than it was to work with patients and develop this awareness. What I've noticed is that when I start moving into that zone, first of all, obviously I have to pay attention to my breath. Okay. I focus on becoming very receptive. Okay. I focus on expanding myself, not from here. Okay. The intellect is not where you should expand yourself from. You have to expand yourself from your heart and your gut. You expand from here, doing that with breath. Okay. And then one of the things that happens is that I start experiencing a pixelation in my visual field. So my visual field starts changing. Everything starts feeling more fluid. Okay. It doesn't feel as discrete and concrete as it does, when I'm kind of navigating through reality in a normal way. And so a lot of times when I am doing clinical work, I move myself into that, I move myself into that space. And over the years, certain things, I've started experiencing certain things that are reliable. So the first energy that I was able to, the first energy that I identified had to do with meditation. It had to do with whether someone was able to be deeply in a meditation or not so deeply, and then I was working in group homes. A lot of the residents were lying. It's adolescent group homes, so they all lie. I was a senior supervising psychologist. So I wanted to figure out how I could detect lies better. I was just curious. I bought a book by, a couple of books by Paul Ekman, who, Dan, I don't know if you know this, he's a Derner alum. I don't know if you know, do you guys know who Ekman is?
The Faces, right?
I have no idea.
Yeah, 1958. He's a Derner graduate from 58. I never would have guessed. So, he did this work on detecting lies and the universal, universal expression of emotion with facial expression. So I was reading that book and I was encountering a couple of my residents who were lying, and I was just kind of centering myself, and I noticed that my stomach started feeling expanded and kind of like nervousy, and I noticed that the sides of my mouth kind of wanted to smile, like fear a little bit, and that has become my signature way of telling if someone's lying to me. If I'm in the zone, I can feel it.
Can I throw a quick question at you? I want to have a devil's advocate moment.
Sure.
If the down-to-earth devil's advocate kind of, just imagine a naysayer, doubting Thomas here. Let's go back to an earlier example, the idea of that torus of energy, the idea that you can sense things beyond you, that our energy expands beyond our skin. And a person says, oh, that's just a bunch of woo-woo. We're talking voodoo here. Come on, get real. How do you answer the ordinary objection?
Well, there are a couple of ways that I answer the ordinary objection. The first is the honest, which is that I'm only a person and I am left with my own limitation. Okay, so I know that what I experience is idiosyncratic, and I don't even know what to call it. It could be a form of synesthesis. It could have been that by reading Ekman's book, I became unconsciously attuned to microexpressions, and that my body is just kind of giving me that feedback when I'm unconsciously perceiving these microexpressions. So to be totally honest, I am open to alternate interpretations even of what my experience is. Having said that, with some of the naysayers, like with that example that I talked about before with the mother in the garage and the headache, by the way, I call those experiences parasomatic. Okay, just to put a term on them, I call them parasomatic because they feel like somatic experiences, but they happen outside of my body. I don't, with that person, I can just say, look, I can just tell you that that's what I experienced, take it or leave it, like, I'm sorry that you're going to stay locked in those mind forged manacles that you find so comfortable.
How about the hard physicist, though? What immediately came to my mind in answer to my own objection was, well, you have a thing called a Faraday cage, which it took a really good physicist. Actually, he wasn't a great physicist. He was a great imaginer, Michael Faraday. It took, I think, Planck and a few others to do the equations for what Faraday was talking about. A Faraday cage is essentially if you want to build a room in which there will be no electromagnetic leakage, there's a formula for doing it. And the reason that's a big deal is because there is fucking nothing in nature that doesn't have a field. So the idea that it has to stop at the edge of your body violates the most basic laws of physics.
Well, of course it does. Look, the reality is this: any wireless transmission, okay, whether you're talking about your phone that you keep in your pocket, whether you're talking about well, not the television, that's wired now. But if you're talking about a radio, okay, whatever it is, all of those waves are permeating our bodies. They are all on a physical level moving through space, and they are at a bandwidth that that they're at a high enough frequency that they can penetrate through what appears to be solid matter. And of course, there's no such thing as solid matter, really, because there's always more space than matter. That's the nature of matter. So if you look at the basics beyond a Newtonian frame, because what you're really talking about, Dan, is more of a Newtonian physics.
Most people don't go beyond Newtonian physics. They just don't grasp it.
Of course not, because it's what we can observe directly. If I drop this cup, I know my coffee will spill, and it'll probably break when it hits the ground. That's the Newtonian level. The quantum level is a level that we can largely intimate into. And as far as I'm concerned, our consciousness is connected through quantum pathways. The ionic interactions in our brain, the chemical interactions in our brain are ionic. Okay, the neurons are fueled by ionic interactions, positive and negative charges. Those are the easiest particles to be in two places at one time. Those are the easiest units that are amenable to the bizarreness and kind of the Alice in Wonderland quality that quantum physics offers as an alternative view of reality. So yeah, I have a lot of responses actually to those who naysay, but when it comes down to it, I try to choose my battles wisely.
Yep, your battles and your competitors.
This is a bit of a jump, but I wanted to go back to spirals for a second, because so I remember being very fascinated by the Fibonacci sequence and like all that sacred geometry stuff when I first came across it, and I when you mentioned the idea of falling down the spiral, I remembered an image that I had through let's say also intense meditation. nothing illegal for sure, but that I would see these sort of spiral shapes pop in and out, and it was this weird thing where like it was different in that I didn't feel like I was falling down or like my consciousness was like descending down something. I was just like I had these just rapid fire thoughts that I felt like would be leading to something, and then of course they wouldn't, and then I would sort of see this little like spiral thing like swirl in on itself and then kind of vanish, and it was like that seems like a a metaphor or something, something
Yes.
there.
Yes.
Yeah, is that so I saw a lot of affirming nods there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, so my thoughts on that are this. Okay, I have done hallucinogens. They were not legal when I did them, but I think the statute of limitations protects me because it's not really my thing. I've done both LSD and mushrooms.
Kiss your license goodbye, Webb. This is the
That's
end.
it. To be totally honest, compared to what I've experienced in meditation and in a meditation process, that is like parlor trick stuff.
Really? Yeah.
Well, I mean, look, I can understand why psilocybin can be used as a therapeutic tool. I can understand that it can open up consciousness in a way that's actually in somewhat much gentler than the intensive meditation that I was doing at 19. That psilocybin wears off within 6 hours or so. Meditation doesn't. You have to reconstitute the self when you shatter yourself meditating. You have to kind of literally weave yourself back together instead of just kind of kind of enjoy the tracers and such. Having said that, within shamanic circles, a lot of times hallucinogens are used as an initiation. Okay, so a lot of times, whether it be peyote, whether it be psilocybin, whether it be one of the frogs from South America, whether it be ayahuasca, and there's another one, John. It's not St. John's wort, but it's like I can't remember what it is. It's another. I think it comes from another mushroom, perhaps in Peru. A lot of times these are used as a way of opening portals or opening doors. Okay, and then once the shaman is trained, they don't have any need for the substance anymore because the consciousness is already opened.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because I did I think I did MDMA a couple of times and then mushrooms a couple of times, and it did feel like there was a big ramp up on the first one, and then there was maybe on the second or third also, but then there started to be like diminishing returns from it, and worse experiences now and that, and it very much felt like I thought I was finding something here, but maybe I didn't have like the discipline that you're talking about there to really like navigate it.
Well, it depends on what you're trying to integrate. Like I grew up relatively grandiose. I wanted to be a Buddha. That's not a good thing to want to be. I mean, it basically, like when you try to transcend your ego before your ego is developed, it's not a great thing, and that is exactly what I did, or that's what I attempted to do. And then my adult identity has been formed in the process of both becoming a psychologist, which basically means that you put yourself on hold in a lot of ways to the service of others, and trying to develop these different spiritual awarenesses. So it actually has been very complicated and painful at times and perilous at times and those kinds of things. Yeah. One of the things that's nice about ritual within shamanic practice is it creates a field of containment. Containment is a beautiful thing. That's one of the things that I've learned, that if you're able to contain awareness within a ritual, then you don't have to worry about it leaking out when you're at the grocery store and all of a sudden you get hit by knowing some shit about the person next to you that you don't want to know, or whatever it might be. So, or even feeling the feelings. Okay. So I mentioned that I detected, I can feel when people lie to me. That doesn't happen as much. Okay. What I more typically feel is sadness, and I can see the sadness, when a person is when there's sadness in the room, it has, and believe it or not, this may sound strange, sadness is a beautiful energy. I see sadness and grief as a gift, because it's such an honest emotion. It's such an honest emotion, and people defend so hard against it. And when I'm with someone, a lot of times I will either feel or almost see the sadness way above their head. A lot of times, even before they it seems, before they're even aware of it being there. And so, I'll say something like, what's the sadness? And then it's just like, usually it's like the cloud opens and it just comes through. And that energy goes wherever it needs to go. I don't know where it's supposed to go. I don't know where it's supposed to go. I just know it's not supposed to be held up here. Okay. My most vivid experience with that was about 4 years ago at a nursing home. And I was talking with a woman, and again, I felt this weight starting to descend. And then all of a sudden, and I had never experienced this before exactly. All of a sudden, it was like something from her pushed it away. It was like, I was like, huh. I was like, what's going on? It's like, that felt like sadness, but now it's not there. I was like, again, like, it feels like there's sadness that you just don't want to acknowledge or something,
Yeah.
And she was like, how did you know? She started crying. She had lost her son about a year before. She hadn't dealt with it. And so those are the kinds of experiences that I have had that are confirmatory to that there's something to this kind of perception. I believe that it has to do with perceiving energy, feeling energy,
Which makes it not supernatural, not parapsychological. It is simply we are bathed in and produce energy. And the idea that we have somehow evolved all that, but not evolved a natural method for tapping into it and perceiving it and refining our perception of it makes no sense.
Mm-hmm.
We ought to, the idea that somehow we have these noses and there are molecules out there, but it would be weird to think we smell it.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody would question that.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that there is energy that goes beyond us and that we are designed, so to speak, to pick it up and interact with it frightens people. One reason, of course, being, it's definitely an anti-conventional religion day today. It's because that is associated with demons,
Mm-hmm.
spirits. We are, your comment about fundamentalism before, that if we can't allow ourselves to perceive the energy in the room around, from the people around us, then how on earth can we develop as individuals? How can we develop our attachments, our capacity to care, to love? And we will be stunted as a result.
Yes. Well, right. And growing up in an individualistic culture that tells us that we are discrete individuals and that we are disconnected and that we are defined on the basis of our external accomplishments and that we're defined on the basis of the external metrics, displaces the authority of our experience. And it gives every incentive not to pay attention to intuitive senses, let's say.
I think that's a very good and yet another perspective on this whole kind of capitalist discourse of what we're talking about now, the kind of evolution that Dan proposes in a way. If I interpret what you were saying, Dan, the kind of refinement process that should be more on our radar, given that these are the things we have to work with, they are completely stunted by what we are eating, like fucking binge eating, whether it is like consuming shows or clothes or junk food or whatever. So that's a very kind of important point. And I think I love what you said there about grief and sadness. And I remember us talking about that. I mean, I have a thing for this. I love it. And I remember me and Dan speaking at some point about, I said something around the, tears, they dwell up from the belly and they kind of come out through your nose. Like they go through the whole system. And
Yes.
I've also had this idea of like tears as kind of windshield wipers in terms of perception and vision, right? Like after you've cried, is somehow you get that feeling of reconnection to something, right? Like you said, like it's an honest emotion. You have been able to express it and you feel more, or I feel more whole or somehow better contained in a way, right? So I have that kind of idea of crying as windshield wipers on the car. You're kind of like adjusting your vision to go out in the world. So I thought that was,
they've actually found, and I just again, a few months ago, they actually found that tears contain toxins. Okay, so when we cry, we literally are releasing.
Cleaning ourselves. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So, and again, these are like, I'm sure you had your insight before you just found this out. My attitude toward tears has been the same. But then to find that they're these physical analogs, that they're actually toxins, that we are alleviating ourselves. We're purging toxins when we cry.
It's like the animals that lick, like the cat licks itself or something. It's like a self. Yeah, cool. I had something else I was going to say, but yeah. So the tears is toxins. That's beautiful. Like cleaning ourselves somehow. Yeah, it's profound.
When you were talking about like seeing that sadness energy, hovering and then coming through, I thought like, yeah, I've definitely felt something like that before. One time definitely on mushrooms, but like other times completely sober. Whereas there is a very much a physical release that happens. And those times I have felt like something's actively leaving me right now. I can sense that.
Yes.
I think that there's absolutely something to that.
But let's play with that idea that the grief, because this is not a novel idea either. I'm thinking of Freud and mourning and melancholia, and I think it's quite well established in therapeutic theory that a successful mourning, as opposed to getting stuck in a kind of melancholic state and not being able to process your grief, there are two very different kind of situations to be in terms of moving on from whatever experience you've had. So if we play with the idea of this kind of grief process as one key kind of figure or concept in some kind of positive trajectory, what would you say, Webb, are kind of a energetic representation of grief, or like a fractal figure, or like why is it so hard for me as well as for many other people to access? I mean, the times I am able to access that, I feel so much better, and I feel proud of myself somehow, and I feel like this is good, I'm on the journey, what I need to do. But then it can be so difficult, even though I know I carry all this in my body, whatever therapeutic setting, it just doesn't click. I'm not able to get into that mode where I release it. And I guess that would be similar for many other people out there, or listeners. What are your takes on that? Like, why is it so difficult to access that kind of, but to process, work through, whatever is the best word?
Metabolize or synthesize or integrate.
Release it. Yeah.
Release. I think that sadness and grief is our most vulnerable emotion, or related to our most vulnerable emotion. Shame, honestly, shame may be our most vulnerable emotion. But years ago, I looked at, there has been work on the relationship between shame and grief as well, that those who are in grieving also tend to have a heightened experience of shame. I think that on the one hand, we naturally, so think about it. I have a pretty good memory of my childhood. Okay. I can remember, for example, when I was about 4, being stung by a bee, and how much it hurt, and how much I yelled, and how out of control it felt. Okay. And so, on the one hand, I think as an individual, we recognize, well, we're out of control. It feels like we could die from this, so let's tuck it away. That gets into the denial of death, and like what kind of goes into psychological defenses to begin with. I think the more onerous contributor to the process is social teachings around sadness and grief. And I think that both men and women are told that they shouldn't cry. Both men and women are told that they should suck it up. I think men get more of a dose than women when it comes down to it, at least in Western cultures.
But women are considered weak,
right?
Because they express and integrate their emotions better.
Right, and so this actually gets into, even archetypally, we could say that this, we could see that this could be a battle between negative animus and negative anima. Negative, now granted, negative anima is more like sulky, not crying and vulnerable. But and negative animus is like a chainsaw interrogation. It's like, well, it's like Trump was, like kind of the most full-bodied incarnation of negative animus in recent history. So I think that it's both. I think that we try to self-regulate ourselves. That's all about developing psychological defenses. But then we're taught that we're not supposed to feel these ways. I can remember my grandmother telling me that I shouldn't cry. I can remember my father telling me I shouldn't cry. I can remember my mother telling me I shouldn't cry. And one of the things actually, this is something fascinating. I've been practicing for 28 years. Just about 2 years ago, I had a good reminder of how delicately we should deal with tears. I had a patient who, I had this experience of the sadness coming, and she started to cry. And what did I do? I handed her a fucking tissue box, man. What happened? The tears got tied off. I tried to regulate her. I tried to soothe her instead of just holding her sadness with her.
That's a very good point.
It circumvented the process. So even something like that can kind of create a reflexive.
That's a very good point. It makes me
courteous and chivalrous. Yeah, come on.
That, Adam Phillips, I know you like Dan. I read something that he had written, like a quote somewhere, that the psychoanalytic process is like the only place in our current society and culture where people are allowed to be truly unhappy. He's like, this is the most toxic. I mean, his point was that there are no rooms, like there are no social representations, forums, constellations where it is, what Webb just said, where you are holding space for that kind of natural grief to be released, that everybody needs to do at certain points in their lives. So he considered psychoanalysis to be a kind of revolutionary force in the very aspect that it allows people to feel what they're feeling. If you're sad, you're sad. That's okay. It doesn't have to go away. It doesn't need to be fixed. It doesn't need to be tissued up. It needs to be felt. Right?
Yes, feel it to heal it. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So,
and think of how easily, Martin, even with a sense and a tone of kindness, somebody might say, "Oh, don't cry. No, don't cry."
Right.
We mistake that for kindness.
Yes.
When we're really saying, among other things, is, "Oh, please don't. I'm not prepared to empathize with you right now."
Well, right. It's like a Monty Python skit. I remember, in one of them, he's like, "I hate to see a grown man cry. So off with you." So out of here. Like that kind of thing. Right. What we think is supportive can actually be undermining to the expression of deeper emotions. Absolutely. Yeah.
mm-hmm.
Yeah. So I something else I wanted to mention about spirals, actually. So back one more time to spirals. Because this I feel like this keeps coming up for like in my life now. One of the guys I watch on YouTube recommended this graphic novel. I've gotten into comic books lately, which I don't know, 32 is a little late for it, I guess, but they're great. There's a lot of really good stuff now. But yeah, it's this one called Uzumaki. It's a Japanese one, and it's a very weird story. It's sort of horror like and bit of a dark humor in it too. And the story is, I'm still in the middle of it, but it's about this town where there's spirals start appearing everywhere, like they're in sort of like the in the river. There's just all these whirlpools forming and stuff. There's like little dust devils and little wind, twisting like mini tornado things happening all the time. And then like a bunch of the adults and like the kids notice that this is happening to the adults. The adults are becoming like fixated with them. So like this one guy's dad will just like see a snail and the shell will just like completely entrance him and they can't get his attention or anything. And that guy gets so fixated on this spiral shape that he and again, there's this like absurdist element to the story, but he orders some kind of like round like the bed or like bowl kind of thing that he can get into, and like he spirals himself, and this kills him because you can't like do that to yourself. But they like find him and he's like spiraled. It's this weird body horror absurdist moment. And then his wife goes crazy and becomes obsessed with getting rid of spirals, to the point where she's like scraping off her like fingerprints, and like it, you know, it's just insanity. So that I feel like it's probably making a commentary on the same thing we were talking about. I don't really know where it's going yet, but
A spiral's a vortex. Why would it be a good representation of evil and obsession? That's the question that comes to my mind.
right.
Yeah. Sorry, do you want to answer that, Joe?
Oh, I don't know. I was just
Yeah, I think my association goes back to what I said a little bit before, that duality between wanting to know versus relaxing, right? So if you get so obsessed by something, whether it's fractals or physics or music or spirals or, you know, cheeseburgers, whatever it is, right? You completely lose touch with your real life, right? So you go mad in some respect. Whatever diagnostic term to be used is perhaps not the most important, but that's what I associate with the story, that the guy loses himself because he gets so the spiral shape there could be like, I don't know if it's evil, but it's interesting in the sense that it has maybe the scientific potential or this universal shape, right? There is something real about the spiral, so one would understand that a person could end up there. So that's what I'm thinking. And then the wife, I guess, becomes completely scared of the same thing, or, you know.
I take a slightly more Hegelian, I guess, interpretation a little bit, because we see thesis and antithesis in their reaction, and the Hegelian model is essentially a spiral anyway, you know, because we're going from thesis, let's say, being absorbed by the spiral, being enchanted by the spiral, that's thesis. Then we have antithesis, which is the wife rejecting the spiral altogether. And so I'm curious about what the synthesis is, actually.
Where's the child in the story? Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Guys, we're coming down to the end of our universe today. So the bottom of the spiral of the show, perhaps. I'm wondering if anybody has a question or a comment for our guest that can help lead us out.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know. I want to say, like, I think, you know, even when I was going to leave a few minutes ago, like, I wanted to say, like, we should have you back because I do feel like this is sort of unfinished. It'd be great to do, you know, a part 2 or just another whole episode.
I have tons of more material. I'd be happy to come back. We literally just scratched the surface of different things, both philosophically and experientially, you know, not only for me, for each of you as well, you know. So
Well, maybe next time, Webb, will you tell the story of your staff?
absolutely, yeah. Happy to. It's pretty trippy. Nice little synchronicities. So yeah.
All right, Martin, got any thoughts?
No, not really. I think the Hegelian ladder was a good way, and I think the kind of, for me, the ideas of grief and release and symbolizing function and, you know, finding those middle grounds, that's always what we end up talking about in one way or another in these shows, I think. Of integrating opposites and, you know, that kind of stuff. And I think that's the beauty of a spiral, right? That you can go down, but you can also go up.
Well, and I just realized talking about spirals, this has been in the background all the time. And I mean, obviously,
The coiled snake.
but the snake itself is in a nice little spiral shape as well. So,
Cool.
Well, I would like to thank Webb Garrison, Dr. Webb Garrison, my friend and neighbor here in Huntington, New York, for joining us today. We're going to have us a part 2, so stay tuned. And gentlemen, Joe, Martin, Webb, thanks for helping us keep it real and reeling it in.
my pleasure.
See you again.
All right. Take care, Webb.
Bye,
Take care, guys.
folks.
Bye-bye.